Good afternoon. My name is Doug Holder, and I'm here with my guest, Michael C. Keith. And I'm going to read an introduction to Michael C. Keith. Michael C. Keith is the author of more than 20 books on electronic media, among them Talking Radio, Voices in the Purple Haze, Radio Cultures, Signals in the Air, and the classic textbook, The Radio Station. He's the recipient of numerous awards in the academic field. He's also the author of dozens of journal articles and short stories, and has served in a variety of editorial positions. He is the, in addition, he's the author of an acclaimed memoir, The Next Better Place, screenplay co-written with Setwa Pal. Is it good? Never has it been in?
It's with an entertainment company right now, so Lord knows.
Yeah. A young adult novel, Life is Falling Sideways, and 5 other anthologies of Night and Light, Everything is Epic, and Through the Trembling Air, Sad Boy, and Hoag's Object. He has been nominated for 2 Pushcart Prizes and a Penn O. Henry Award, and is a finalist for the National Indie Excellence Award for Short Fiction Anthology, and finalist for the 2013 International Book Award in the Fiction Visionary category. Welcome, Mike, and glad you could come here on this rather frigid night.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I'm a fan of the program.
Thank you. Now, Mike, you had anything but a run-of-the-mill childhood, right? You know, and that's in your Next Better Place, was your memoir that came out 12 years ago.
Right.
You were on the road with a rather ne'er-do-well father, living in flop houses and constantly around eccentric and sleazy characters. It seems that this sensibility, in some ways, of this offbeat and sort of attitude and sensibility is reflected in your fiction as well. Is that true?
Oh, I'd say that's a good insight. Certainly, it gave me a different perspective on the world from a whole host of directions. I come at my characters having seen so many unusual types of characters on the road for the 12 years. And so, despite the fact that it was kind of a desolate existence for a kid, it was nourishing in kind of an odd way. Certainly,
and in fact, it may have...
yeah, I wonder...
I mean, if you just had the standard,
I often wonder about that. I'm not sure that I would be a writer had it not been for that, although for many, many years after I became an adult, I viewed it as kind of a curse that I'd had such an irregular childhood, a childhood of impoverishment with no opportunities. I was angry at my father until his dying day, but now, although these many years ago, I'm of the mind that it was something that contributed to my voice in my writing, and that has absolutely fertilized my imagination, much more so than I think if I hadn't been out on the roads of America with my father.
Right. So it was like a sort of adolescent on the road.
Yeah, exactly.
How did this happen? Why did this happen?
Yeah, in fact, you say on the road, book list or something called it. Just they said it. They said kind of an adolescent or a little league on the road or something like that. But it happened because my mother and father divorced when I was 5. He because of his alcoholism. They had 3 kids, and I was connected with my father despite his shortcomings, and my sisters were slightly younger than me, so it seemed an appropriate symmetry that I went with my father and my sister stayed with my mother. So my mother agreed to that, and I think for the rest of her life she regretted it. She was haunted with that decision. Kind of like a Sophie's choice in a sense. But she had no other choice at the time. He wasn't providing her any kind of alimony. She was working as a waitress in Albany, New York, and she had 2 tiny kids, a 3- and a 4-year-old to take care of. So I went with my father, and he had promised her, well, okay, we're right here in town. I'll put him in school, and he'll have. And of course, a week after that, we set out on the roads because he thought he could find better opportunities elsewhere.
What did he do?
Well, he was in what he called the hotel racket. He was bellhopping. He was bell captain at the DeWitt Clinton Hotel in Albany, and he had burnt his bridges because of his drinking. So he felt he had to get out of town. I was just 5 years old, and so the idea of hitting the road, traveling, going to romantic places intrigued me.
Especially if you're from Albany.
Especially if you're from Albany, yeah, right. Let's get out of this glamorous place. And of course the idea, too, of not having to go to school because school was coming up, and we just set out, and I just missed whole semesters of school from the time I was 5 until I was 17, and finally convinced him to sign me in the Army, because by that time I knew I was on a bad road, that I certainly wasn't going to achieve or accomplish anything with him. And I had this ambition, which I think I got through the great American filmography of achieving things and accomplishing things. So I saw the Army as a way to, hey, it'll give me some opportunities. It will give me credibility. I'll be doing something, because I felt even at that time that all of my relatives figured, well, I was probably going to be a lost cause too, because I'd spent my entire childhood bumming the countryside with this alcoholic, coming back intermittently after a year or two, and then disappearing again with my father, because he would always promise me another adventure, and zoom, we'd had him. We had lots of adventures. Fortunately, even though he was asocial or sociopathic, you might say, he was still very watchful toward me and caring. He didn't have the kind of sense of responsibility to think, well, then I should provide him a roof over his head permanently and a dependable schedule of meals and put him in school. That was beyond his thinking. His thinking was, well, he'll get a hoot out of just going to California and going to Florida, and I did, and I wanted it. I encouraged him. As a matter of fact, I became his co-conspirator, and that's what we did. 12 years of
unbelievable
meandering and meandering.
And so, like we were getting back to the fiction, and in your fiction, there's that sort of eccentricity coming out in all these characters.
Yeah, eccentricity is probably a good word.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the way I see things. That's the way I think. That's the way I storytell. I don't think I could write a domestic story or domestic novel. Most of my characters are peculiar. Some are very perverse. Some are victims. They cover the gamut based on what I had witnessed and been exposed to through the years.
And I especially saw that in your one of your newer novels.
Yeah.
Is the Collector of Tears here, and which is, you've had one guy one sort of alienated adolescent looking for someone who found a face that looked just like his. They went to meet that person, and he met a very bad end.
Right.
Bunch of old guys at the Dunkin' Donuts talking about an accident, and an accident almost visibly happened in front of them. Right. A professor who died after letting out a loud fart. Yeah. And it reminds me of when Auden says, when someone dies, the dogs lift their legs. You know what I'm saying? It's not a big, profound, like a lot of us are going to die on the toilet straining.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
The mayor of Philadelphia, for once.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I see that in your stuff. Now, I've worked the night shift at a mental hospital for a while.
Oh boy, that
11
must
to
be
7
grist for your mill.
Right. The master. The nature of the beast of these characters who work the night shift are that they're off the beaten path. A lot of them are just, don't want to deal with the day world, and
Right.
and they're very eccentric, and I include myself in that. And you wrote a book on the late night radio, and I wonder if you could say, in a way, it's sort of like a working the night shift at a mental hospital in a way.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the.
Yeah,
what was that seminal book you wrote on that?
Think about this. It was, oh God.
Well, if you can't remember.
Let me see. Maybe it's in.
Yeah,
maybe
but anyway,
it's in
just
there.
talk about that. And
Yeah, this is what happens to me at this age. You
Yeah.
forget. I have a tendency that.
was it the radio station?
No.
All right. Well, anyway, maybe.
I have a tendency to put my last book on the shelf and go on.
All right.
And go.
But you did an
cold
extensive study of
I
late
did.
night talk shows.
Yes.
Tell me, I grew up when I was a little boy listening to Long John Neville, and Barry Gray, and then I was frightened. Well, he was on late night talk, but I heard him. I used to hear who was that evangelist? Since I was Jewish, he said I was going to be going to hell. Billy Graham.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and then
way back when.
Dr. Fitz. Then there was these Dr. Carlton Fredericks.
Right.
All these characters, you know, they
Yeah.
were sort of like snake oil salesmen in a carnival. I mean, you tell me about this whole culture.
Yeah. I had been an all-night worker myself.
Yeah.
And also, even when I was very young, even on the road, I would often listen to radio late at night. I think my earliest recollection was Wolfman Jack, who in the 50s was operating out of Mexico with a 500,000-watt signal that blanketed most of the United States. And of course, he was famous for howling. And
he was a DJ, right?
He was a DJ, yeah. He was a DJ and an entrepreneur, and he had a very unique sound that really played with the whole idea of the darkness and the moon and the eeriness of the nighttime. And so looking for another area that I think I could invest myself in, because I'd done a number of books in the realm of radio studies. I had done a book on Native American radio, which most people...
Yeah. I mean, you
most
wouldn't think
people
about that.
didn't
Yeah.
Signals in the Air, and then I had written a book that had to do with radical right wing on the air, and maybe about 10 different books on different aspects of radio within cultural context. And so the idea of examining, I had known that there were such prominent people, as you've mentioned, Long John Neville and Barry Gray, and Gene Shepard, who was one of the greatest monologists of all time. In fact, he ended up writing the motion picture, The Christmas Story, and whatnot. And he sparked my imagination, Gene Shepard, in the 1960s. He would go on the air and began to tell a tale about his aunt, and 5 hours later still be telling that tale, and telling it in such a way it was absolutely mesmerizing. It was very, very unique. So I knew that all-night radio was viewed in an interesting way by the medium itself. All-night radio was considered almost like a throwaway zone in terms of spot revenue. Few advertisers wanted to be on at 2 or 3 in the morning, and so they would give that shift to brand new people entering the field who oftentimes didn't know what they were doing and then violated the format. And then they had people who loved being on radio all night long and brought a certain unique creativity.
And something about being in the dead of night, 3 a.m., the dark night of the soul, and listening to this was an intimacy. Yeah.
That was it. Long John Neville really played on that. He did a lot of paranoia. And then, of course, in the 90s, you had Art Bell out on the Nevada desert near Area 51, who talked all night long about extraterrestrials.
Was that in Roswell? Or?
No, that was in Nevada.
Okay.
Right up in the he had his studios in a compound behind barbed wire
Yeah.
fence, and he broadcast from there, and it became a syndicated show around the country and became the most popular all-night show in the country back in the 1990s. And it was all about the paranormal and extraterrestrials and whatnot, taking again advantage of, like you say, the fact that the nighttime is a time of mystery, and then on top of it, he was right near Area 51, the fabled.
And but you know, remembering Long John Nelson, they also had these characters who would come on. I mean, there was a TV counterpart of that, and his name was, there was like a Joe Pine. There was this other gentleman.
Oh yeah,
Joe Pine, but there was another guy like him, and Alan Burke. Do you remember Alan Burke?
Alan Berg.
Yeah, he was on the TV, and he would bring in people like want to make the state of Georgia a separate country, and then he would throw them out of the living room.
Right.
And,
I remember Joe Pine because my
yeah.
first experience in radio, he was syndicated on the station that I was on.
And he was sort of a shock jock.
Oh, he really was. I mean, he would invite prostitutes and all sorts of characters, and then deride them and defame them and denigrate them and very controversial.
And like Bob Grant, you remember him?
Well, yeah.
He was another one.
Joe Pine wasn't so right-wing as Grant, who was really over the lid on the right.
But he was entertaining.
But he was entertaining, yeah. I mean, I also teach a course, a section, of course, about all-night radio and talk radio, and invariably we have to talk about Rush Limbaugh, who's been the most popular radio talk show host in America for 25 years. In fact, AM radio argues that he single-handedly saved AM radio. And people say, oh, he is just so disgusting in his views and whatnot. And I say, yeah, I don't hold to his right-wing views, but he's damn good radio. He's a consummate radio entertainer.
You know, like Jerry Williams.
Jerry Williams.
Another one.
Yeah, and I was the chair of education at the Museum of Broadcast Communications and met Rush Limbaugh and had conversations with him, along with Larry King, another all-night guy in the 70s, who really resurrected radio, all-night radio on a national level and repopularized it.
What do you think of it now? Like, I like WBZ. I've been on a show, the late night show with, I forget
I'm
the
trying
guy's
to think of the guy's name because I interviewed him for the book.
Yeah.
And of course I can't.
What do you think of this?
Well, you know,
it's not as, you know, it's not as exciting as I remember.
No, it isn't. Oh God, who was the fellow who used to? He passed away of AIDS, as a matter of fact.
David Brudnoy.
David Brudnoy.
He was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I was on his show, as a matter of fact, and so it's not as intellectual as it certainly was with Brudnoy. But what I like about local talk, and especially Boston being such a legacy station, is that it's a community forum. You know, they may not talk about the most titillating subjects in the world. They may be talking about potholes and the local town council and whatnot. But it's kind of the last community on the air, and I think it serves a very valuable service. My concern is the demographics of something like all-night radio, especially on a station like BZ. You know, they don't have young people tuning in. Young people are not tuning in radio. That's one of the major problems now. So I wonder how long they can sustain an audience. The audience is getting more and more elderly, and changes are coming for radio. Substantial
everything changes.
Everything changes, yeah, exactly.
Now, I was going to say, you worked on radio for a long while, and a dream of yours, but what soured you on it?
Well, you know, sometimes I say, if you can't do it, you can teach it, but that's unfair. What soured me on it was, and I had worked almost in all areas of radio. I started out on the air, and then I was a production director. I did news, and then ultimately it dawned on me, unless you were a top-rated personality, you weren't going to make a lot of money. And the people at radio stations that were making anything were on the business side, generally in sales. So at one point after 10 years in the production end, I went into sales and stayed there 2 or 3 years and found that I didn't really have the backbone or the heart to peddle airtime. And there were people better at it than me. So by that point, I felt like I had worked my way right out of the medium. And at that time, I had gone back to graduate school and become very interested in literature and hoped that I could then eventually transition into academia. And I did. I ended up getting a teaching job, even though I had a terminal degree in literature. When I was looking for a job, it seemed the schools that I interviewed with were more interested in my actual background in broadcasting, so I ended up being hired as a professor of broadcasting and have remained so for 35 years now, and without any regrets. I have always had a longing to write and write books, and so finally back in, I'm trying to think of when all of this happened now, back in the 70s I began writing about the medium of radio while teaching, and then started writing books, and I embraced Hemingway's adage, you know, write about that which you are most familiar, and started writing books, textbooks initially. And then I discovered that the whole area of radio's role in American culture had been overlooked. There were really no books about it. There were books about the history of radio and the personalities of radio and the programs of radio and whatnot, but there were no books that really examined the influence that radio had on almost every aspect of American culture. So I shifted and I started writing academic monographs on the role of radio in American culture, and covered a slew of different areas in it.
Now, I wanted to mention our fine friend Robin Stratton of Big Table Publishing. You published, and she's out in Newton, and she's a great gal and loved by many. And she published 2 of your books, right?
Yeah, she did. And I can't quite remember. I've known Robin a few years now, and I can't quite remember. Oh, I think I met her through submitting a story to Boston Literary Magazine.
Yeah.
And she published some of those, and then that led to my becoming aware that she was a publisher for Big Table Publishing, and one thing led to another, and I submitted a manuscript, and she published it, and went a couple of years, and she published another. And she is now in the process of creating the Newton Writers Group. Well, she had it, but now they're going to be creating an actual brick and mortar center.
Oh, wow.
For writers, and it will offer readings by published authors. It will offer workshops in all facets.
Where's she getting the funding for that?
Well, as it turns out, her ex-husband had a building in which he had an antique store. He had a whole area of the building that was open, and he offered it to her as a center for writers.
That's nice.
And so she's in the process.
An ex-husband. That's pretty.
An ex-husband, and you're on very good terms, and I hope they stay that way. But as a matter of fact, she invited me to be on the board.
Wonderful.
And it's about to be kicked off or get off the ground, probably over the next couple of months.
Oh, congratulations, Rob. Maybe maybe you sent me an email about it, but this is the first I heard of it. But I hope that works out. I was going to ask you. I'm a big movie fan, and I was trying to think of a great movie about talk radio, and the one I remember is The King of Marvin Gardens.
Yeah, that was
with
great.
Jack Nicholson and
There's been a number of radios.
So what would you say some of your favorite?
All right, well, probably the most significant the most significant film on talk radio is called Talk Radio.
Right.
And it's, am I losing my mic?
Oh, your microphone. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, it was muffled, wasn't it? Yeah, there we go. I was told by the producer to keep it. And it came out in the late 80s, and as a matter of fact, you mentioned the person's name. It was based on the assassination of talk radio host Alan Berg in Denver. Eric Bogosian wrote the play about it, and then he
starred in the movie, didn't he?
And then he starred in the movie. The movie is absolutely compelling. It's fascinating, and it's frightening, and it's pretty much on the mark, as a matter of fact. And it was produced or directed by Oliver Stone. Great production values. Alan Baldwin.
This must have been about 15 years ago, right?
Yeah, Alec Baldwin. No, actually, now it's more like, oh my gosh, how long? It was 87.
Wow.
So 25 years ago. And Alec Baldwin's in a number of people. Well, in my course that I teach at Boston College, Radio and Culture and Society, one of the modules focuses on talk radio. So at the end of the academic year, I conclude it with showing that movie, which is a great piece of powerful punctuation that really demonstrates the clout of the radio personality and the radio voice.
Great propaganda piece. I wonder in Nazi Germany, did they have great radio personalities who were...
Oh, they did. You know, Goebbels, I think, was ahead of the communications, and the Nazis used radio brilliantly and actually inspired the rest of the world in terms of how to use it for propaganda purposes.
Would you hire Goebbels?
I don't think so. But as an aside, do you realize that it was the Nazis that invented magnetic tape, recording tape?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's one of the fruits of war, I guess, but it's such a bizarre thing.
Okay, so actually, we've had such a fascinating conversation. You don't have much time to read, but maybe you can read a really short piece. You have a new, actually, maybe, you have a new book coming out. Maybe we'll talk about that.
If I might bring you up to date, this book says 5 previous short story collections. This was the 6th. I've actually done 2 since then and have a 10th in the process. So I'd be happy to read something short from this.
Yeah, you got about 3 minutes.
Oh my goodness, 3 minutes. Well, maybe I better read a very short piece. Let me just, as I said to you earlier on, I tend to finish a book, put it on the shelf, and it collects dust, and I forget. So maybe I'll just read an itty bitty one. It's called, what is it called? Big Black Car. Okay, so and this is quite short.
From the Collector of Tears. Yeah.
From the Collector of Tears. Big Black Car. It has a front quote by Thomas Carlyle. When the body and material substance of it has altogether vanished like a dream. The story. Marvin looked into his rear view mirror and saw a big black car behind him. When he checked his driver's side mirror, the big black car was not there. Nor was the big black car evident when he checked his passenger's side mirror. He returned his gaze to the rear view mirror and found that the big black car was not only there, but had moved closer. Again, he looked into his side view mirrors and was relieved to see the big black car, although